Welcome everybody. It's so nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Radha, and I am a poet here in Boulder. For those of you who are local, I know we have at least one person joining non-local, which is very exciting. I'm the author of Bloodline, which was awarded the New Mexico Book Award in 2018. I teach at Lighthouse Writers Workshop quite a lot, which is based here in Denver. And then they also have a satellite location in Louisville, which is a little closer to Boulder. And I also teach poetry independently. So this is one of the things that I do, at the library, offer community classes for people who are just curious about poetry and want to try doing something fun and creative and new. So I know at least a few of you are not newbie poets. So some of what we cover might be, a bit basic, but nevertheless, even for myself, somebody who's been writing for 20 years, I'm still sort of enchanted by some of the really basic things that I can go back to in poetry. So we'll be looking at some of that today. So if you don't have any experience, you're in the right place. And if you have experience, you're in the right place. It really doesn't matter. So we will, let's see, to do some housekeeping before we dive into our writing exercises. So the library would like me to record this class. I'm recording it so that they can offer it out to a larger community. So, let me know if you raise your hand if you have an issue with being recorded, but it is being recorded today. It'll go up on the library's YouTube channel. All of the library's online events are an extension of library services, so library conduct policies apply. I myself am not quite sure exactly what all those policies are, but I think it probably just means we need to be good, decent human beings during tonight's session. The library recommends you follow internet safety and privacy guidelines, and the event is part of the Summer of Discovery. So that's, they annually have sort of a celebration of reading and virtual programs that are designed for kids, teens, and adults. And if you're interested in other events that are happening, you can go to boulderlibrary.org/summer and see what's available through the program. And I personally would love to thank the Boulder Library Foundation for its sponsorship of this workshop. So let's get into our session today. And for those of you who haven't taken a class with me, I like to run these little sessions kind of like a drop-in yoga class where you come, you've got your writing utensil or your keyboard, you just relax and see what comes up, and do the things that are offered in a way that feels natural to you. So there's no pressure to produce anything. Definitely use this as a time of sort of connecting with, your creativity in a natural way. So every class I do starts out with a little invitation to do a little free writing, and I want to emphasize that this is purely a free write. This is not trying to write anything that sounds like poetry, but the idea is to really get down as much detail as you can in as short a time as possible. So we're probably going to take, we'll take just like 5 minutes. I have one more person to admit here. Hold on 1 second. So I want you to just recall your morning. So imagine that you're waking up to your day and write down as many sensory details as you can remember from this morning. And if this morning seems like a not so fun thing to recall, maybe recall the last time you went outside and spent some time outside. If you get really stuck, you can try writing your day backwards in sensory details. So, literally starting from the time you sat down to do this class, backwards through the day and recalling, sort of interesting sensory details from the day. Don't write, again, don't write in complete sentences even, just fragments just as many details as you can. So go ahead and wrap it up where you are. And for part two of the warm up, I'd like you to circle the details that stand out to you most. So, you know, which of the details that you just wrote down seem most vivid or interesting to you? Okay, and then if you haven't already, imagine that those details have a message for you. What is that? All right, so go ahead and wrap it up for a minute. Um, so, you know, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, as I think we all have, with all the extra time that we have in our lives to do a lot of thinking. And, um, you know, I always have been asking this kind of question, but to me right now, this question of why poetry, you know, what does poetry have to offer us in this moment? And how does the practice of poetry might help us cultivate resilience? You know, what does it offer to us in this time period? So I think everybody has their own relationship to poetry and what poetry means to them. But I think, you know, it's a particularly powerful practice right now because it really is connective. You know, for me, poetry is, you know, it sparks things like empathy. You know, I mean, it literally, I was reading Sappho the other day, and it literally connects us across millennia to people who lived before. And, you know, those who come after us may connect to us through what we write now. um, you know, it stimulates that sense of beauty and delight and wonder in the world, which I think we cannot underestimate the value of in these moments. And, you know, I think that the practice of poetry, you know, certainly it has for me and for many of my students, I hear them express that it, you know, it really gives them access to a sense of wisdom or inner resource. And I have a theory that, you know, we only use 10% of our brain. My theory is that poetry is one of the ways that we get to access that other 90%, like other art forms. So those are a few of my, you know, kind of attempts at saying why poetry might matter right now in this moment. And you all get to decide for yourselves, what it means for you. So, one of the superpowers of practicing poetry is, I think, the poet's ability to stay awake to everyday details. So, the exercise that we just did together, remembering the morning and writing down the details and sort of honoring the experience, even if it was a very ordinary one, is something that we can all do. Here's a picture of a guy who's looking out a window. I think we're all doing a lot of this right now, or walking around our neighborhoods, or paying attention to what's going on with our houseplants or pets, or but these little everyday moments, I think, really can be a source of inspiration for poetry, and that act of sort of looking and noticing and paying attention can help ground us, and bring us a sense of joy. So I love this collection of poetry. Some of you may know it. It's been around for, oh gosh, probably, several decades at this point. It was edited, selected by Czesław Miłosz, who was a Polish poet who came over to the US and really has had a profound influence on a lot of contemporary poets. But it's a beautiful book of very accessible and beautiful poems. And so the poems I'm going to share with you today come from that anthology. So, in this anthology, there's a bunch of poems from different centuries, and I pulled a few from like this one, where it just again, like I said in the beginning, that connectivity across millennia, across many centuries, can happen. And here's a poem from I believe a concubine, right? A concubine who's been tossed off by the emperor, and she's talking about waking up in her morning. So she says, "Morning, I get up. I am sick of rouging my cheeks. My face in the mirror disgusts me. My thin shoulders are bowed with hopelessness. Tears of loneliness well up in my eyes. Wearily, I open my toilet table. I arch and paint my eyebrows and steam my heavy braids. My maid is so stupid that she offers me plum blossoms for my hair." So it's not a very hopeful poem, but it made me laugh and recognize myself in this moment that she's describing, in terms of waking up and just being sick of it all, right? And it's a very simple poem. There isn't a lot of flourish here. She's simply recording sort of her external circumstances and her internal state, and how those two things are coming together in this very ordinary way. Here's another poem about waking up to the morning from a poet named Philip Levine, who just a tremendous poet, very working class kind of background, very much a champion of sort of the everyday, ordinary experience of life. And he writes, "A sleepless night. April, and the last of the plum blossoms scatters on the black grass before dawn. The sycamore, the lime, the struck pine inhale the first pale hints of sky. An iron day, I think, yet it will come dazzling, the light rise from the belly of leaves and pour burning from the cups of poppies. The mockingbird squawks from his perch, fidgets and settles back. The snail, awake for good, trembles from his shell and sets sail for China. My hand dances in the memory of a million vanished stars. A man has every place to lay his head." So, again, not a lot of flourish and fancy language happening here. Just a very, very down to earth, yet poignant expression of the poet's experience of waking up in the environment where he is. You know, there are the plum blossoms. It feels very particular, although it could be general. The plum blossoms, the pine, an iron day. You know, I'm really curious about what does an iron day mean. Um, the mockingbird squawking. You know, so he's creating out of these ordinary details a feeling state, right? So it's not just that these are beautiful things that have happened. There's a feeling state that comes out of I think the way that these images have been arranged on the page. And then that last line, you know, a man has everywhere to lay his head. Um, I think only the poet could write that. You know, that's what he's seeing in these details. Um, each of you could see similar details and come to a different sort of end statement. But I'm curious, I'm going to unmute everybody, and I'd love to hear what you all are noticing in these poems.
I like how I always love this in poetry, when you go from the specific, you know, plum blossoms, black grass, the lime, pale hints of day, and then you go to this, then you get this beautiful abstraction. My hand dances in the memory of a million vanished stars. I just love how you move from the very specific and concrete and then can take a leap. And that's what I love about poetry.
Yeah. Great. Other thoughts, reflections, images that particularly stand out?
I guess I was struck by the fact that they both end with another person. The maid in the first person, and then just a man who's every man, I guess, in the second poem. Seems to cast the whole thing outward at the end.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what do you make of that? How does that affect you as a reader?
I guess it makes me think that taking note of those details is then a tool to connect with other people. Being able to express them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that there's a lovely movement, right, that happens, you know, not just with those last lines, but these are such interior poems. You know, the interiority is very strong, right? You get the sense of a single consciousness, right, interacting with the world, and so to end with that opening out, right, to another person, or you know, even in the Levine poem, you know, sort of greater humanity. It feels like the way you go into your day, right? So it's so almost like at this accident of that process. So, I mean, you know, I think a lot of you are very familiar with this idea of the poetry, but I think these are examples of how powerful it can be to use imagery, work with it, and again to go back to that sense of the poet being someone who is actively noticing and really keeping all of the senses alert, right? So not just, you know, when we say image in poetry, it's not just the visual sense; it's also auditory, you know, touch, taste, smell. The senses must be there in poetry, otherwise it really doesn't work. I guess there are some poems that are purely abstract. I'm sure somebody could call me to task on that, but the best poems I think are really grounded in that felt experience. So, you know, also, you know, not just to, as we said, not just to sort of record those details, but then to allow those details to show us some kind of insight, right? To, you know, as this book says, to bring the poem to an emotional pitch or to embody an idea. And that's something that you know, when I teach beginning students, often they have this sense that they should come to the page with a really distinct set of ideas that they want to express it poetically. And in fact, poetry works the opposite way. It's most often those abstractions, ideas, emotional. So any questions or comments before we move on? I have a couple more poems to share, and then we'll move into another writing exercise. Karen, did you have a?
Just your audio is breaking up. I don't know if anyone else is having that, but I'm having your audio kind of so.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Shoot. Okay. Well,
it just started in the last maybe few minutes.
Okay. Well, raise your hand if it happens again. Can you guys hear me now? Maybe if I just get
you just broke up.
Okay. Try headphones.
Also, it seems to be less when we're all muted.
Is that any better? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, better.
Oh, okay, great. Excellent. Okay, so let's keep going. So here's a little poem written by an exile. Again, I really connected to this one because it seems to speak to this moment in particular. Exile in Japan. On the balcony of the tower, I play my flute and watch the spring rain. I wonder if I ever will go home and see the tide bore in Chikyang River again. Straw sandals and old begging bowl, nobody knows me. On how many bridges have I trampled the fallen cherry blossoms? So, of course, we're not exiled from our homes, but we are exiled from our everyday lives, our normal, quote unquote, normal lives. So, you know, this poem seemed to me really resonant in that sense. Here's one a little closer to home, written in New Mexico, called Dusk in My Backyard by Keith Wilson. He says, the long black night moves over my walls. Inside, a candle is lighted by one of my daughters. Even from here, I can see the illuminated eyes, bright face of the child before flame. It's nearly time to go in. The wind is cooler now. Pecans drop, rattle down. The tin roof of our house, rivers to platinum in the early moon. Dogs bark, and in the house, wine, laughter. So, you know, I went looking for these poems, and before, you know, without much conscious effort, I noticed that a lot of them either began the day or ended the day. And you know, these liminal spaces, or these spaces where we're transitioning from one thing to another, are often where poetry tends to happen. But I think we can also just, again, look to those morning times or evening times as sources of reflection, and a time to connect into those details. Here's one called The Zen of Housework. I look over my own shoulder, down my arms to where they disappear underwater, into hands inside pink rubber gloves, moiling among dinner dishes. My hands lift a wine glass, holding it by the stem and under the bowl. It breaks the surface like a chalice rising from a medieval lake. Full of the gray wine of domesticity, the glass floats to the level of my eyes. Behind it, through the window, above the sink, the sun, among a ceremony of sparrows and bare branches, is setting in Western America. I can see thousands of droplets of steam, each tiny spectrum rising from my goblet of gray wine. They sway, changing directions constantly, like a school of playful fish, or like the sheer curtain on the window to another world. Ah, gray sacrament of the mundane. So pause there for anything that you're noticing in those poems, anything you'd like to add. And if you want me to go back to one, let me know.
Can you go back to the one with the candle? And yeah. I just love that. I just love that dogs bark and in the house whine, laughter. Again, that moment of kind of like really opening it up to a whole, there's a whole other thing happening. And I just like those little detonations in poetry. The possibility, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's not a whole lot that's overtly said, right, in this poem. It's just a series of noticings, in a sense, right? But the way that those noticings move somehow moves us.
Yeah, there's a logic. It feels like there's a logic. You know, you try, the poet is just this thing and then this thing and then this thing and then all of a sudden this beautiful thing. So it's really lovely.
So one last poem, and then we'll get into doing some more writing. This one's by Adam Zagajewski. He's a Polish poet who teaches in Texas, and also has had a sort of a influence on a lot of contemporary poets. Moths. Moths watched us through the window. Seated at the table, we were skewered by their lambent gazes, harder than their shattering wings. You'll always be outside past the pane, and we'll be here within, more and more in. Moths watched us through the window in August.
Mm.
So I loved the way that this poem looked outward and looked inward at the same time, and imagines this sort of action of the moths. You know, they just take on such a sort of symbolic, almost harsh, right, role in this poem, and yet there's something very tender at the same time. So I thought this was an interesting example that takes it a little bit further than just the noticing of details. Maybe sort of tries to make a bit more meaning out of that moment. So, you know, back before we get into the writing, actually, a couple things that I've found in my wanderings, like my interior virtual wanderings during this time. So this is a painting that was done by a man who was in a Japanese internment camp in Arizona. And this painting jumped out at me from the collection at the Denver Art Museum, which they have online. And I thought that the beauty of the simplicity of this poem really evokes that sense of, one, of noticing, right, of noticing the landscape and sort of lovingly rendering this very simple view that he has. But also there's a sense of longing, or a sense of, you know, loneliness in this painting. And I think poetry can do a lot of the same work, right? To express the emotion that's happening through a simple gaze. And then I loved this. I found this in the New York Times. It was an article called "How Birdwatching Prepared Me for Sheltering in Place." And the writer says, "Birds have taught me to love what is small, what is delicate, what is elusive. I've learned that a truth is many details comprising what seems like a unified whole. And I'm more inclined now to immerse myself in the details for their own sake." So I thought that was lovely, you know, that you could immerse in the details really literally for the sake of those details on their own. All right, so to go back to our writing practice, now that we've had some inspiration and some thought about, you know, how the details that you wrote down earlier might work into a poem. I want you to look at the ones that you circled, right? The ones that you felt were most interesting to you. And I want you to try to, you know, you don't have to stick to just those details. You can start to add on or, you know, remember other things. But sketch a poem that transports the reader into your life through those images. You know, again, I don't want you to put too much emphasis on what those images mean to you. A lot of times, you know, the best poems don't express that overtly, but there were examples that we looked at today that were more explicit. So that's your choice if you want to sort of go there with what those details are pointing towards for you. Any questions or comments before we dive in? So go ahead and wrap it up wherever you are. So would anyone like to share a little of what they wrote? Oh. Okay, you guys are unmuted, so. Oh, Cynthia, I think you're still,
Okay.
there you are.
Right. Okay. No bird song, no moon. Punching the pillow, I sink into comfort. The night has its own life. Later, a tower of flax milk, a pot of green tea. What is it I am not seeing? Day or night, I float on a raft of faith. That's it.
Lovely.
I couldn't sleep.
Yeah, that was gorgeous. Could you read it one more time? Cynthia, we can't hear you. Oh, I think you're, oh, there you are.
Did I do it again? Sorry. I'll read this faster. No bird song, no moon. Punching the pillow, I sink into comfort. The night has its own life. Later, a tower of flax milk, a pot of green tea. What is it I'm not seeing? Day or night, I float on a raft of faith.
Yeah, gorgeous.
Thank you.
Who else would like to share? No one?
I will.
Don't make me
I
read.
will. I'll do it. Okay, this is June morning. Air so cool, I want to cry. Morning relief on ashen skin. Along with light, always light. I move towards sunrise like a swimmer rising to surface, like a dreamer working toward truth in a dream. My body moves as memory, feet on floor, hands hoisting a plate for the cat, a bowl for the dog, 2 thumps in the yard, chicken legs for the fox, hummingbirds whirring at the feeder, then coffee, my hands on the cup, my pen on the page.
I love that sense of, you know, the swimming, the trying to, you know, but then finding it, right, with those, the plate and the bowl, and there's this nice tension, I think, between that sense of where are the edges,
Right.
and then like these concrete things that you know, are there.
I was just thinking about routine because, you know, I mean, I don't know. I have a routine every morning, which is, and I can probably do it in my sleep, but I have the routine of everybody gets fed and then I get coffee. So
I love it. Anyone else?
I'll go. My feet strike the gravel, seams in the tarmac, the slope of the gutter, a storm grate I can't dodge because a truck bears down. I try to adjust. As I go from shade to full sun and breezes cross my path, I guess at the temperature, fiddling with the volume of my music as traffic ebbs and flows on my route. When I'm home, I open the door and I'm surprised by the silence. Surprised I have time to slake my thirst, kick off my shoes.
Yeah, read the beginning again. This poem goes places.
My feet strike the gravel, seams in the tarmac, the slope of the gutter, a storm grate I can't dodge because a truck bears down. I try to adjust.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way, there's like a feeling sense as much as a visual sense in those details, going out and literally being on the ground, right? And
that was the first thing I thought of when you said sensory recall from the morning, was like that distinct feeling that I was really feeling the ground under my feet for some reason.
Well, and how often do we just go about our day and not feel that, right? And perhaps, if you're not actively writing these things down, you might notice and then they never come back to it. But there's something really delicious, I think, in returning to that felt sense. Yeah. Well, and I loved the movement, like I said, of where that poem went. Maybe because I'm craving movement. Too many days in the house.
So many days in the house.
Too many. Well, Karen or Carol or Patty, do any of you want to?
I will share. I am not a poet. My first time, really. Okay. Sticky eyelids open and close at 7 a.m. I pull the sheets tightly to my chin. At 9, I rise. Gray clothes hang off my limbs. A splash of cool water. A yellow stain by the sink finally gets noticed. Before my feet ever touch the carpet, conversation began in my head about what to do with this being awake.
I love it. I love the yellow stain. Right? Somehow these things that are even these ugly little details, right? The stain or the cracks in the pavement can somehow become like these rich details that make the poem feel authentic, and I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. You don't have to be a poet to write, and I thought that was lovely.
Thank you.
Well, we have just a couple more minutes, so one last call, Patty or Carol, if either of you wants to share. I'm guessing no. Okay, great. Well, fantastic. So we're wrapping up right on time, and I have a couple closing remarks from the library that they'd like me to tell you guys. So again, just want to say thanks to the Library Foundation. If you are interested in participating, there's one more session of poetry happening in a few weeks. So I would love to see you all there. It'll be a slightly different focus, different exercises and poems that we'll be reading. So that's on July 8th. Sign up, get in touch with me if you need the link again. And if you want to see other events, go to boulderlibrary.org/summer. And that's it for tonight. So stay in touch. I can be reached at the email on this slide and welcome your comments and feedback. And yeah, I hope everybody stays well, and thanks for
Thank you.
participating.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Radha.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.